I'm in the last chapter. I know this is the last chapter. It's not a terribly scary place to be. The one thing I know about myself is, as long as I'm alive, I'm going to keep living. My name is John Sparks. I was born in Brockton, Massachusetts. A few years later, we moved to Florida, and I lived in Miami and Hialeah for 2 years, at the end of which my parents' marriage dissolved, and I was back in Brockton, Massachusetts with my mother, staying with my grandparents. I went to 13 different schools in 12 years of K through 12. So one of the things that happened to me as a kid was I really learned how to make friends in a hurry, because I wasn't in one school long enough to really establish long-lasting relationships. And when I was growing up, we were all pretty much in the closet. I mean, there was Noel Coward, and later as a teenager and a young man, there was Gory Vidal, and there were a few famous people that we knew were gay, but we didn't know any local people who were gay unless they were a local joke. There were a couple of people that would be pointed out and saying, well, you know, he's a pansy, or he's a sissy, or one of those things that you did not want to be. Whatever you were, you did not want to be. I was different, and I knew I was different, and I didn't know what it meant. I was a good little Catholic boy. I was altar boy to a bishop. Worse luck, I was never diddled by anybody. So I had no experience at all. As a teenager, I dated girls. I enjoyed them. The girls liked me. I could dance. We went to proms. We did all of those things, except we didn't have sex, because I was a good little Catholic boy. And I thought, good little girls don't do that. That's how stupid you can be when you're young. I was a nerd. You know, I was a bookish type. I was the one who was getting the good grades. I was the one, the football player would come and say, hey, help me with my physics homework, or I'm going to flunk off the team, you know. And so they would come to me because I could do something for them. And I went to a boys' school. The last 3 years of high school was a Catholic boys' school, so it was all boys. I wanted sex, and I knew it was wrong to have sex. So I was a little twisted, because I thought sex was heterosexual. I knew people sniggered about stuff like that, but I didn't know what they were talking about. When it finally got graphic enough for me to understand oral sex and anal sex, the idea of anal sex was just so repugnant. It was like, oh my God, I can't believe people would actually do such a thing. I mean, it's it's so silly now. So for me, the darkness in my life there came from a different place. It came from, I can't stop wanting this. I couldn't stop masturbating. It was like, I know I shouldn't do this. Why am I doing it? Why am I doing it? Because it was the only outlet I had. And that really is what made me unhappy. It was that guilt. And because I was going to a Catholic school, I still had to go to confession every week, and I had to go to church every Sunday, and I had to, oh my goodness. And I mean, they really ought to tell kids, okay, masturbation is not the horrible thing you've been taught to believe it is. Get over it. But wow, when I was young, it was just, you weren't supposed to. It's all you knew. And I believed them. I was naive. I believed them. I believed that if I jerked off and got hit by a truck, I would go straight to hell for eternity. I believed that nonsense. How awful is that? Now, I think the other boys, they didn't take it so seriously. I just believed it. But eventually, I was 19 years old, and I met an older man who knew the ropes and brought me out. It was such a typical story, an older man bringing out a younger man. He was my mother's age. I mean, he was 25 years older. I mean, is that a lot? When you're 19, didn't seem like a lot to me. I mean, he was vigorous. There were lots of reasons why he appealed to me. He was a musician, and I was learning music, and I had that. But I was consumed with Catholic guilt. That relationship was doomed. It couldn't last because, as much as I really loved that guy, he was not a responsible man. He didn't take care of himself, and he certainly didn't take care of me. And there came a point in my adult life when I realized, this is dragging me down. I can't do this anymore. And I stopped. And that's when I totally understood what it meant to be gay. And I learned to embrace it. And I learned to say, hey, you know what? That's what I am. That's who I am. I'm not going to try to hide it anymore. I am not going to try to deny it. And I am not going to feel guilty about it. I refuse. I absolutely sloughed off the Catholic guilt. Sadly, I was around 30 years old when that happened, but that's what it took. It takes what it takes. My mother's reaction was, you don't think you'll ever meet the right girl? And I was saying, no, Mom, that's not how it works. It's not, it isn't ever going to happen. So she just couldn't quite understand. When I was 5 or 6 years old, my father had a friend. If I remember his name correctly, it was Lee Zerhusen. He was a sailor. He was younger than my father. But Lee and his girlfriend would come and visit, and I thought he was the coolest guy in the world. And I realized all those years later, when I finally sloughed off the Catholic guilt, I realized that was a sexual attraction. I didn't feel it as sexual. But at 30 years old, I remember, I know why I like that guy. It's because he was really good looking. He appealed to me. He appealed to something in me. And once this happened to me, once I had this understanding that I was not a lesser person, my life went on an upswing, the likes of which I cannot describe. It was like being on a roller coaster, only staying at the top. So I've been there now for over 50 years, and it's still up there. There's a lot of angst in my youth, but none in my old age. And I have been able to make a life doing the thing I love to do, which is writing musical theater. I've also been fortunate and able to help hundreds of writers learn about their work, see their work in front of audiences. I've worked as an artistic director in a theater company in Chicago where over 300 teams of writers got a chance to see their work in front of an audience, either in a reading or a workshop, and in some cases, a main stage production. And I'm still doing that because the theater, for lack of a better word, that's my church. I discovered the musical theater in Boston when I was 15 years old. There was a TV show called Mike Stokey's Pantomime Quiz. And one day on this show, there was an actress I'd never heard of. Her name was Elaine Stritch. She was there on the program to tout a new musical that she was rehearsing. With a little help from my mother, I said, how do I get tickets to a new musical? She said, well, you take the bus to Boston, you go to the theater, you give them money, and they give you a ticket. That's about what I needed to know. So the show was Goldilocks. I went and saw this show, and for 2.5 hours, I was the happiest kid. And I realized, this is where I want to spend my life. So I was lucky to learn that at such a young age, because the next 15 years were not happy years. But I had a place I could go, a place I could be happy. I wrote when I was in college. I wrote and produced and directed 3 musicals. They were all execrable. They're all terrible. But that's how I learned. By the time AIDS came around, I was 40 years old. And the idea of going through all the rigors of meeting somebody in a gay bar and negotiating sex and negotiating condoms, and it's like, it's almost not worth it. The one relationship that I had that I thought was going to take me to the grave ended abruptly. And so I just didn't have sex for many years because I wasn't interested in casual sex. And I was living in two cities, and it's just, I had a good friend here who ultimately became a lover. There was a neighborhood bar. I would go there for a drink, and I met him. We were both ex-Catholics. We had a lot in common. So he came to my house for a drink before the show. And I said, so I don't know you very well. Tell me about yourself because I'm interested. I'd like to know you better, and I don't even know if you're available. And he said, well, I'm really not. I have, there's somebody in my life. And this is peculiar to me. It never occurred to me to say, well, if there's somebody in your life, what the hell are you doing having a drink in my living room and going to the theater with me? What is this about? It would never, I just accepted it and said, okay, well, that means we're going to be friends. And I turned that particular spigot off, and I didn't look to him anymore as a possible partner. Although that's why I had invited him that night. So the guy that he was really into was a younger Hispanic man, and eventually he died of AIDS. And Bill was very upset when he died. It was like, he said, I don't know. He said, I feel such relief, and then I feel badly about that because he hurt me so much. And I said, well, okay, I'm your friend, so all I can do is sit here and commiserate. I can't do anything for you. Okay, flash forward a couple of seasons, and the movie that he wants to go to see is Brokeback Mountain. This must have been 2005 or 2006. And the next morning, I'm off to Chicago. 2 days later, I get a card in the mail saying, I've thought about this, and I would like to take our relationship to a more intimate level. This is in a card that he sent me. And my first thought was, oh, don't be ridiculous. We've been friends for 15 years. This is just not possible. But before I answered it, I thought, well, now, wait a minute. You've been alone for those 15 years, and you didn't intend to be alone for those 15 years. And you've been on the lookout the entire time, and you've not met anyone. And here's someone that you were initially interested in. Why would you say no? So I picked up the phone and called him. I said, okay, I would be interested. Here's the problem. I'm going to be away 2 weeks out of every month. And he said, I have considered that, and I still want to try it. And I said, okay, then here's my schedule. Pick me up at the airport, and we'll go to your place instead of mine, and we'll see what happens. And that's what happened. And we carried on that way. And he was diagnosed with MDS. So they tried a stem cell transplant. They found a match, and they did the transplant on Labor Day weekend, and in 2011. And by Thanksgiving, they knew it had failed. It was a privilege to be his caregiver because we had both decided, well, we are the kind of people that don't want extraordinary means, etc. But to live through it, to be there and to watch him go from a walker to a wheelchair to a hospital bed and finally to morphine and an eyedropper between his lips to dying in his sleep, it reaffirmed my own feelings about end-of-life issues. I mean, I knew that's what I believed I wanted to do, but I didn't. You never know what you're going to do until it happens. But I was privileged, if in a sense, to watch that happen and see it, and it worked the way I thought it should. I know I'm 82 years old, but I don't feel old. Sometimes I can get out of a chair without sound effects now, but I see that that's coming. I see that, age happens. That's why I have no regrets. All the bad stuff that happened to me has gone into making this guy, and I'm really glad to be who I am.